My name is Elaine. I'm 34 years old. 3 years ago, I stood in the middle of a ballroom wearing a dress I'd sewn myself because my mother-in-law had accidentally canceled the one I'd ordered. 300 guests were staring at me. Champagne flutes were frozen mid-air. My husband was standing 6 feet away from me, and he didn't say a single word in my defense. His mother had just called me into a live microphone at her annual charity gala, a useless little drama queen who married above her station. She thought she'd broken me. She had no idea I had a flash drive in my clutch that was about to break her. But I need to take you back to the beginning, because what happened that night didn't start at that gala. It started 7 years earlier, the first time I walked into the Ashworth family estate and realized that I would never, ever be enough for these people. No matter what I did, no matter what I gave, no matter how much of myself I sacrificed on the altar of their approval. This is the story of how I lost everything, my dignity, my marriage, my home, nearly my sanity, and how I got it all back with receipts. If you've ever been made to feel small by someone who was supposed to love you, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is for you. I grew up in Ridgefield, Connecticut. Not the wealthy part. The part people from the wealthy part pretend doesn't exist. My mom was a home health aide. My dad drove a delivery truck for a bakery distribution company until his back gave out when I was 14. After that, Mom worked doubles. We ate a lot of rice and beans. I wore my cousin Tammy's hand-me-downs until I was 16 and got a job bussing tables at a seafood restaurant on Main Street. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you this because it matters. It matters because the Ashworth family never let me forget it. Not for one single day. I met David Ashworth my junior year at the University of Connecticut. I was there on a full academic scholarship, double major, English and communications, 3.94 GPA. David was there because his family had donated a building to the business school, and legacy admissions are a real thing. He was kind, though, at least back then. He had soft brown eyes and a laugh that made you feel like the only person in the room. He carried my books once when I was struggling with a torn backpack strap, and he didn't make it weird. He just helped. We dated quietly for 2 years. I didn't meet his family until after graduation. I wish I never had. The Ashworth estate sat on 11 acres in Greenwich. The house, if you could call it a house, was 14,000 square feet of limestone and imported Italian marble. There was a staff of 7, a driver, a personal chef. The driveway alone was longer than the street I grew up on. David's father, Richard Ashworth, had built a commercial real estate empire worth somewhere north of $85 million. His mother, Genevieve, Ginny to her friends, Mrs. Ashworth, to me, always, had never worked a day in her life, but she ran that family like a 4-star general runs a battalion. And then there was David's younger sister, Clarissa. Clarissa was 22. Fresh out of Wellesley, already driving a $95,000 Mercedes SUV that had been her graduation gift. She had a $2.2 million condo in Stamford that her parents bought her as an investment. She worked part-time at a gallery owned by a family friend, a job that required her to show up roughly 12 hours a week and drink Prosecco with clients. I showed up to that first dinner in a dress I'd bought at TJ Maxx for $34.99. I thought I looked nice. I'd curled my hair. I'd practiced conversation starters in the car. Genevieve opened the door, looked me up and down, slowly, deliberately, the way you'd inspect a stain on a sofa, and said, "Oh, you're smaller than I expected." She didn't mean my height. She meant my worth. At dinner, she asked me what my parents did. I told her. She set down her fork, dabbed her lips with a linen napkin, and said, "How brave of David to look beyond circumstances." David squeezed my hand under the table, but he didn't correct her. That was the first time he didn't correct her. It would not be the last. Before I continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever walked into a room and felt, in your bones, that you weren't wanted there? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. David and I got married 2 years later. Small ceremony, my choice, or so I let people believe. The truth is, Genevieve told David that if he insisted on marrying me, she wouldn't fund a spectacle. She gave us $15,000 for the wedding, which sounds generous until you realize she'd spent $40,000 on Clarissa's birthday party that same year. At our wedding reception, Genevieve gave a toast. She raised her glass and said, "To David, may you always remember where you come from." She didn't mention my name, not once. We moved into a house in Westport that Richard helped us buy. A $780,000 colonial that was beautiful, but came with invisible strings attached. Every holiday, every Sunday dinner, every family decision was an opportunity for Genevieve to remind me of my place. Here are just a few moments. I could give you 100, but these are the ones that still wake me up at night. Our first Christmas as a married couple, the family did their gift exchange in the great room of the estate. Clarissa received a $12,000 Hermes Birkin bag. David received a Rolex Submariner, retail around $9,500. I received a coat from a brand I'd never heard of. When I thanked Genevieve, she smiled thinly and said, "I wasn't sure of your taste, so I kept it simple." Later, Clarissa whispered to me in the kitchen, "That coat was from the housekeeper's closet. Mom re-gifted it." She laughed like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. When David and I started trying to have children, I made the mistake of mentioning it at a family brunch. Genevieve set down her mimosa, looked at Richard, and said, "In front of everyone, I just hope the children take after our side of the family, genetically speaking." I felt my face go hot. I looked at David. He was buttering a croissant. Richard invited David to join the family real estate company. A corner office, a $220,000 starting salary, equity options. David was thrilled. I was thrilled for him. At the celebratory dinner, Genevieve turned to me and asked, "And what will you be contributing, Elaine? Or will you just be decorative?" Everyone laughed, even David. He caught himself and squeezed my shoulder, but the laugh had already left his mouth, and I'd already heard it. I had a miscarriage at 9 weeks. I was devastated. I called Genevieve because David was traveling for work, and I was alone, and I was bleeding, and I was terrified. Do you know what she said? "These things happen, Elaine. Don't be dramatic about it. Women have been losing pregnancies since the beginning of time." She didn't come to the hospital. She didn't send flowers. 2 days later, she called to ask if I could still make it to her luncheon that weekend because she needed someone to handle the seating cards. Now, here is where everything changes. Richard Ashworth died of a heart attack on a Tuesday in March. He was 67. He collapsed in his office at 2:15 in the afternoon. By 3 o'clock, he was gone. The grief was real, even for me. Richard hadn't been warm, but he'd been fair. He'd treated me with a baseline respect that Genevieve never offered. He'd once told me, privately, "You're good for David, Elaine. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I held on to that sentence like a life raft. The will was read 10 days later. Richard's estate was valued at approximately $87 million. Real estate holdings, investment portfolios, the business, liquid assets, properties. His will, drafted 3 years prior, was clear. 40% to Genevieve, approximately $34.8 million. 30% to David, approximately $26.1 million. 20% to Clarissa, approximately $17.4 million. 10% to a charitable foundation, approximately $8.7 million. Additionally, the Westport house David and I lived in was to be transferred fully into David's name, free and clear. No mortgage, no strings. But that's not what happened. If you can feel where this is going, drop a fire emoji in the comments right now. 6 weeks after the funeral, Genevieve called a family meeting. I was not invited. David went alone. He came home that night looking like he'd swallowed glass. "Mom thinks we should restructure things," he said. "Consolidate the assets. Keep everything under the family trust." "What does that mean for us?" I asked. "It means the house stays in the trust. And my share gets managed by Mom, for now, until things stabilize." "David, that's your inheritance. It's family money, Elaine. Don't be." He stopped himself. But I heard the word he almost said. Dramatic. His mother's word. Coming out of his mouth. Over the next 4 months, Genevieve systematically restructured Richard's estate. She hired a lawyer, not the family's longtime attorney, but a new one, someone she'd found through a friend at her country club. The charitable foundation was dissolved. Clarissa's share was increased, and David's share was folded into a family trust that Genevieve controlled entirely. On paper, David was a beneficiary. In reality, he couldn't access a dime without his mother's approval. And the house? Our house? Genevieve had it appraised, then told David she was putting it on the market. "We need the liquidity," she said. The house sold for $835,000. I never saw a penny. We moved into an apartment. David told me it was temporary. Genevieve told me I should be grateful. And then, the final blow. I found the emails. David had left his laptop open one morning. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for a recipe he'd bookmarked. But his email was open, and there was a thread between him, Genevieve, and the new attorney, dated 2 weeks before Richard even died. They had been planning the restructuring before Richard passed. There were phrases like, "once the transition occurs and upon the change in estate control." Genevieve had written, in black and white, "Elaine cannot be involved in any capacity. She has no legal standing and no business acumen. She would only complicate things." David had replied, "Agreed. I'll handle her." Handle me. Like I was a problem to be managed. Like I was a dog that needed to be walked. I sat on that kitchen floor for 45 minutes. I didn't cry. I was past crying. Something inside me had turned to steel. I screenshot everything. Every email, every attachment, every document. I forwarded them to a new email address I created, then I deleted the evidence that I'd ever been there. And then I started planning. I confronted David that night. I didn't mention the emails. I wasn't ready to play that card yet. I simply told him I wanted access to our financial accounts and a clear explanation of where Richard's bequest had gone. He told me I was obsessing. I pressed. He told me his mother was right. I was a drama queen. I pressed harder. He told me to leave. So I did. I moved into a studio apartment in Bridgeport with $4,200 in my personal savings account, a suitcase of clothes, and a flash drive containing every email, every document, every piece of evidence I'd collected. Genevieve told the family I'd abandoned David during his grief. Clarissa posted on social media about toxic people who only marry for money. The narrative was set. I was the gold digger who couldn't handle not getting her cut. I had no family money. My mother had passed 2 years earlier. My father was in assisted living. My friends had slowly disappeared during my years in the Ashworth orbit. Genevieve had made sure of that, always scheduling events on nights I had plans, always making me feel guilty for having a life outside the family. I was alone. Completely, devastatingly alone. Her name was Margaret Chen. She was a paralegal at a legal aid office in New Haven, where I'd gone to inquire about my rights regarding the estate. I walked in looking like I hadn't slept in 3 days because I hadn't, and she handed me a cup of coffee and said, "Sit down. Start from the beginning. I'm not going anywhere." Margaret connected me with a family attorney named Douglas Pratt, a quiet, methodical man who wore rumpled suits and had a reputation for dismantling fraudulent trusts. He reviewed my evidence and went very, very still. "This isn't just unethical," he said. "This is potentially criminal. If they restructured the estate before Richard's death using foreknowledge of his medical condition, and there are indicators in these emails that they knew about his heart disease, this could constitute undue influence, fraud, and depending on what the original attorney knew, legal malpractice." He took my case pro bono. "Everyone deserves to not be erased," he said. Let me pause here. What would you do in this situation? Would you walk away and start over? Or would you fight? Tell me in the comments. It took me 2 years. 2 years of sleeping in that studio apartment. 2 years of working as a content writer during the day and earning my MBA online at night. 2 years of therapy every Wednesday evening with a counselor named Dr. Reeves, who helped me understand that I had spent a decade shrinking myself to fit inside someone else's definition of acceptable. I started a small digital marketing consultancy. It grew. By the end of year 1, I was billing $180,000. By the end of year 2, I had 3 employees, an office in New Haven, and contracts with companies across the Northeast. Douglas Pratt, meanwhile, had been building the case. He'd subpoenaed the original estate documents, deposed the family's longtime attorney, who it turned out had been deliberately excluded from the restructuring, and obtained medical records showing that Genevieve had known about Richard's terminal heart condition for nearly a year before his death. She had spent that year positioning herself to seize control. The original will, Richard's true will was airtight. David was entitled to $26.1 million and the Westport house. Clarissa's share was $17.4 million. The charitable foundation was supposed to fund scholarships for first-generation college students. Genevieve had dismantled all of it. And now we had proof. Every October, Genevieve hosted the Ashworth Foundation Charity Gala at the Greenwich Hyatt Regency. 300 guests, black tie, $1,000 a plate dinner, local press coverage. It was her crown jewel, her annual performance of generosity and grace. I received an invitation, not from Genevieve, from Clarissa, who I suspect sent it as a cruel joke. The handwritten note inside said, "Come see what real class looks like." So I went. I wore a deep emerald dress I had sewn myself. I'd taken up sewing during those lonely months in Bridgeport, and I'd gotten good at it. I walked into that ballroom with my shoulders back, my flash drive in my clutch, and a calm in my chest that I had earned through 2 years of pain. David saw me first. His face went white. He started toward me, but Genevieve intercepted. She was at the podium. She'd been giving her annual speech about the importance of family, legacy, and knowing one's place in the grand tapestry of life. She saw me standing near the back of the room, and she stopped mid-sentence. 300 heads turned. "Well," Genevieve said into the microphone, her voice dripping with performative amusement, "it seems we have an uninvited guest. Ladies and gentlemen, for those who don't know, this is Elaine, my former daughter-in-law, the one who abandoned my son during the worst period of his life. I hate to be indelicate," she continued, "but since she's chosen to make a scene by showing up here tonight, I think the truth should be spoken plainly. Elaine is a drama queen. She always has been. A useless, grasping little drama queen who married above her station and couldn't handle the reality that this family, my family, operates on a level she will never understand." She smiled at the crowd. Some people laughed nervously. Clarissa was beaming from her table. David was staring at his shoes, and I walked toward the podium. "May I said quietly. Genevieve laughed. "Oh, by all means. Let's hear the performance." She stepped aside. She actually stepped aside, because she was so confident, so utterly, completely certain that I had nothing. I pulled the flash drive from my clutch and plugged it into the AV system that was already connected to the projection screen behind the podium. The tech team had set it up for Genevieve's slideshow of foundation highlights. It took me 4 seconds to navigate to the file. "I'm not going to give a speech," I said into the microphone. My voice was steady. I was surprised by how steady it was. "I'm going to show you something. Before I tell you what happened next, if this story has you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. It helps more than you know." The first slide was an email from Genevieve to the attorney, dated 11 days before Richard's death. It read, "We need to move quickly. Richard's cardiologist says weeks, not months. The restructuring must be finalized before probate begins. Elaine cannot be involved in any capacity." The room went dead silent. The second slide was David's reply. "Agreed. I'll handle her." Gasps. Actual audible gasps. The third slide was a side-by-side comparison of Richard's original will and the restructured trust documents, highlighting the $8.7 million charitable foundation that had been dissolved, the funds redirected into accounts controlled exclusively by Genevieve. The fourth slide was a letter from Richard's original attorney, now entered into the court record, stating that he had been deliberately excluded from the estate restructuring and that the changes did not reflect Richard Ashworth's documented wishes. The fifth slide was a photograph of a medical report showing that Richard's terminal diagnosis had been communicated to Genevieve 14 months before his death, and that she had begun contacting the new attorney within 72 hours of receiving that information. I let it sit on the screen. 300 people stared at it. Genevieve's face had gone from pink to white to something I'd never seen before, a kind of gray, like the color had been drained from the inside out. "This case has been filed in probate court," I said calmly. "The original will is being restored. The charitable foundation, which was supposed to fund scholarships for first-generation college students, the kind of students Richard Ashworth actually believed in, will be reinstated. And every dollar that was misappropriated is being traced." I looked at Genevieve. "You called me useless," I said. "You called me a drama queen. You told me I married above my station, but the truth is, Mrs. Ashworth, I was the only person in your family who loved your son without a price tag, and I was the only person in this room who loved your husband enough to honor what he actually wanted. I unplugged the flash drive. I walked back through the silent ballroom. David was crying. Not the performative kind, the ugly, broken kind, the kind that comes when you realize you chose the wrong side and there's no going back. Clarissa had her phone in her hand but wasn't recording. For the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. And Genevieve. Genevieve was gripping the podium with both hands, and her mouth was moving, but no sound was coming out. I walked out into the October air and I breathed. For the first time in 7 years, I breathed. The court ruled in favor of restoring Richard's original will 4 months later. Genevieve was found to have exercised undue influence over the estate restructuring. The new attorney was disbarred. Clarissa was ordered to return $3.2 million in improperly redirected funds. The charitable foundation was reinstated with an independent board of trustees. David's share, $26.1 million, was released from the fraudulent trust. He contacted me through my attorney asking to talk. I agreed to one meeting. He sat across from me in a coffee shop in New Haven and said, "I'm sorry." I said, "I know. Can we try again?" he asked. "No," I said, and I meant it. Not because I hated him, not because I wanted revenge, but because I had spent 2 years rebuilding myself from nothing, and I had learned something that no amount of money or apology could undo. I would never again be someone who needed another person's permission to take up space. Our divorce was finalized quietly. I didn't ask for a cent of the Ashworth money. Douglas Pratt told me I was entitled to a significant portion. I told him I didn't want anything that had her fingerprints on it. What I did accept was a seat on the board of the Ashworth Foundation, the charitable foundation Richard had created. I accepted it because Richard would have wanted someone like me there. Someone who understood what it meant to be a first-generation college student with nothing but determination and a $34.99 dress. My consultancy is worth $2.4 million. I have 11 employees, I own a home, a small, beautiful Cape Cod in Guilford, Connecticut, that I bought with money I earned myself. Every morning, I drink my coffee on the porch and watch the sun come up over the water, and I think about the woman I used to be, the one who sat on a kitchen floor reading emails that called her a problem to be handled, and I send her so much love. My father passed last year. He was lucid until the end, and on his last day, he held my hand and said, "You were always the toughest one, Lainey. Always." Margaret Chen is still my closest friend. We have dinner every Thursday. She tells me I saved myself. I tell her she handed me the rope. David remarried. Someone from his mother's circle. I hope he's happy. I genuinely do. But I hope he's also different, because the man I married wasn't cruel. He was just too weak to stand between me and the person who was. Genevieve still hosts her gala. Attendance dropped by 60% the year after my presentation. She's never spoken publicly about what happened, but I've heard, through people who still move in those circles, that she tells anyone who will listen that I manipulated the situation. I suppose she's right about one thing. I did manipulate the situation. I manipulated it toward the truth. Here is what I know now that I didn't know then. Your worth is not determined by the people who refuse to see it. It's not determined by the family you married into, or the family you were born into, or the zip code you grew up in, or the price tag on your dress. Your worth is determined by what you do when everything is taken from you, and you have to decide in the dark, alone, with no one watching, who you are going to be. I chose to be someone who doesn't beg for a seat at tables where she was never welcomed. I chose to build my own table. And I chose to set it with honesty, with dignity, and with the kind of love that doesn't come with conditions. If you're in a situation right now where someone is making you feel small, where someone is calling you dramatic for having feelings, or useless for not fitting their mold, or too much for simply existing as yourself, I need you to hear me. You are not too much. They are not enough. And one day, you're going to stand in a room full of people who underestimated you, and you're going to tell the truth, and the silence that follows will be the most beautiful sound you've ever heard. If this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel for more stories about real people who refuse to stay broken. And tell me in the comments, what's the moment you decided you were done being small? I'll be reading, I promise.